Thank you, Blaine, and many thanks to AfricaAdapt for the invitation and opportunity to be here and to respond to Fatima's excellent and very educational presentation. I run the research programme at CDKN, which is a £50 million 5-year programme funded by DFID and the Dutch government, and we seek to support decision makers in designing and delivering climate-compatible development through research, advisory services and knowledge sharing to support nationally and locally owned policy processes. There are quite a few of us here at this meeting, so please come and ask us for more information if you're interested. Relating to this presentation, there are 3 main areas that I would like to mention. Firstly, comments directly related to Fatima's presentation. Secondly, in the challenge of moving towards climate-compatible development, what do we need to do? And I'd like to outline a little bit about what CDKN is doing in their planning to support this. And thirdly, what are the key challenges in the next 2 years for the climate and development community in Africa? And I have a few thoughts on those for provoking discussion for this afternoon. So relating to the transitions that Fatima discussed and challenges, as we're limited on time, I'm going to draw on just 2 points. The idea of bringing together mitigation and adaptation. Fatima said that really the priorities for Africa are adaptation. But there are amongst us several scientists and practitioners who are focused on the low carbon approach. And whilst the mitigation agenda is not central to Africa currently, it is critical that we do incorporate a low carbon approach tightly into our future development practices. DFID's research on low carbon development is showing that investments in technologies and infrastructure and energy production methods are going to be locked in for many years. So we need to not forget this very important fact in the daily pressing agenda that we have on adaptation, which will become more and more urgent. I also want to stress that it's really critical that we keep the best science involved in the decision-making process. We're looking at higher levels of global average climate change than 2 degrees now, potentially 4 degrees or more by 2100. And we need to be planning for this potential scenario in all of our efforts, whatever the international political rhetoric is around this, and their hopes there are for huge changes over the next few years. So we can hope for a 2 degrees limit, but we need to be planning for a higher limit than this. And it's a big challenge to get this information through in the right place and the right time to decision makers. In moving towards climate-compatible development, how are we going to get there? Climate-compatible development integrates mitigation, adaptation and development strategies within the dynamic country and international context of production, trade, innovation and social change. And I think that there are 4 key areas which will help nations move towards climate-compatible development. Firstly, support for academic research and development of research capacity. In many countries, there is a lack of even basic environmental research to date. In my work in Sao Tome and Principe, it's an area, a country which has very high rates of endemic species, many ecosystems in a very small area in volcanic islands. And the basic knowledge of ecosystems and biodiversity is lacking. So on that basis, how is it possible to understand the impacts of climate change if there isn't the basic environmental research to work with? Secondly, we need to support the best practice from the research and its dissemination and be quite wary of accepting commonly repeated mantras as truth. The links between adaptation and poverty reduction are widely assumed rather than proven. And I think we need to be a bit careful about this. Not all adaptation is necessarily positive, especially for the poorest in society. And Francis Gachafi and Siri Erickson's recent research in Kenya's drylands has shown that with an adaptive practice of gum collection by rural dwellers, particularly women, some of these practices chosen through hardship are unsustainable economically. So we need to be wary of this. Tom Mitchell from ODI thinks that poverty reduction might be best served by a focus on low carbon growth in Africa rather than on adaptation. And this is a hypothesis that needs to be investigated. In CDKN, we are trying to define our research through the needs of policymakers, and we're asking for inputs from all of you as the research community. At the moment, we have a global research call out to examine climate-compatible development theory, policy and practice in different sectors, including the priority sector of agriculture and food security. And we're also setting up regional research calls through established partners, which involve elements of capacity building and mentoring designed to support research communities. We're also supporting Codex Africa through the START process as well. The second area is that I think we need to foster strong and improved links between policymakers and academics. We've seen already in the last 2 days some excellent examples of some organisations really moving forward with this at this conference, CARE International, C4, ACRA and others. In CDKN, we're trying to respond directly to policymaker demands and foster links with the research community in this way. And also we are setting up new links and actions through our Action Lab in April 2011. But we also might think about this on a wider scale. Do we need to think about the whole structure of education around climate change? And do we need to have a new generation of government actors and decision makers with the technical skills to tackle climate change head on? That would need a systematic approach to education and training across Africa. And we're looking to work on these ideas with ClimDev and the African Climate Policy Centre. Thirdly, we need to build on existing networks and partnerships to make what is already good excellent and to support innovative startup ideas. And finally, perhaps the most critical stage, relating back to Fatima's description of muddling through, we need to support the climate-compatible development policy process. It's quite a messy starting point with poverty reduction policy, the poverty reduction strategy papers, which don't integrate climate change for the most part, the national adaptation plans of actions, which have some partial development, the nationally appropriate mitigation actions shortly to be undertaken as projects. How are we going to bring all of these together? In my work in Guinea-Bissau, we see that the issue around government and policy is very complicated. When you have a frequent change of prime minister, a frequent change of ministry officials underneath that, policies can be left on the shelf for years. So we need to be very clear about what are the realities that we're working with as a starting point. And CDKN is supporting the development of low carbon and climate resilient development plans, scoping these in several countries, including Ghana and Rwanda. Finally, I was asked to consider the key challenges for climate change in the development community in Africa over the next 2 years. And my thoughts are that there are 4 of these. There will probably be more, and I look forward to questions on this later. But firstly, keeping it real. We need to make sure that people who are involved in planning projects incorporate the realities of the politics, the economics and the social context in this. And we need to design our projects with flexibility in mind so that it's a resilient and adaptable design of climate and development projects. We know that short timelines and inflexible budgets can be tough to deal with in African context particularly. And also, we are aware that external conditions can change a lot in a short period of time. So we've seen in recent months with cocoa production in Ivory Coast, there's a ban on exports for political reasons, which has had huge impacts on world prices, and we haven't heard so much about the impacts on farmer livelihoods as a result of having decreased or increased difficulty in finding outlets for sale for their produce. The second area, I think, is we still need to make tough choices on what to fund. Although there is potentially money coming on the table from Fast Start and other initiatives, it's going to be challenging. The funds will still be limited, and I think there's not going to be enough to go around to develop all the projects that people want to do. So what are the absolute priorities, and what rigorous research and policy analysis can we do now to help make these decisions right? And what advocacy is needed from the practitioner community, particularly, and from other decision makers to make this happen? The funder requirements are focusing now on value for money, measurement, efficiency, co-financing, aid effectiveness. This is very good, but we also be aware that it provides extra running around for the practitioner community who's seeking funding to do their work. Thirdly, we have the potential conflict or clashing priorities between growth and equity, an ongoing challenge in the perception and reality of this. How does climate change play into this dimension? And one key challenge, I think, is to strengthen government and governance around this, to tackle climate change adaptation and mitigation, and recognise the risks and opportunities for development. And finally, I think dear to all of our hearts is the need to keep a focus on communication and learning with sustained skills development and fostering the networks that we have, and keeping the dialogues going with good research evidence and promoting action and coherence in the work that we do through capacity building and training. CDKN is hoping to support these changes and to join the very dedicated African research and practitioner and policy making community over the next few years. Thank you.